Who would you go to hell for, and what would you sacrifice to bring them back? That is the story of Katabasis by RF Kuang. Welcome to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lena, and today we are talking about all things hell in dark academia in the book Katabasis by RF Kuang. Now, before we dive too much into it, Katabasis, Katabasis. I actually looked this up before the show. So about a couple months ago, RF Kuang appeared on a podcast or talk show and talked about how to say it. And she admits that it's open to interpretation, basically, based on where you are at. Her book, Babel, I say Babel, but a lot of people say Babel. And she actually says Babel, depending on where she's talking about it, wherever she is. So I think it's interesting. You might hear me swap back and forth because I want to say Katabasis, but she said that she says Katabasis. So I will try. But anyhow, let's talk about the basic plot points of this book. So Katabasis is a book about two students at Cambridge, or at least the Cambridge in this story, who practice magic. And this is a world where magic is known. So this is very similar to a book we recently covered called The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. We'll get into that a bit more later. But anyhow, the magic is known in this world, and companies and schools and different governments hire magicians to do work for them. And magic is basically logic-based or philosophy-based. There's like a lot of math that goes into doing magic. So it's a very esteemed position. So Cambridge actually makes sense here. This story centers around two students, Alice and Peter. And in a tragic accident, they lose their professor. Well, why is this very important? Because, well, this professor only has two students. Once you hit the highest levels of academia, professors take on less and less students. So it's not uncommon to have like 2 or 4 in a class. So when he dies unexpectedly, they realize, heck, he hasn't like given us job recommendations yet. He hasn't helped us with our placements. Like, we still need to get his recommendations. Like, this is really important to them. So they decide to journey into hell to bring him back. And there's a lot of logic that goes with this, a lot of research. Apparently in this world, hell is a very well-known thing. And this book is based largely on Dante, or Dante's Inferno. So if you've read that before, a lot of the levels of hell will feel familiar to you. But not only that, in their world, a lot of people have written about hell because there's been other magicians who've gone to hell or researched hell. So anyhow, they believe as scholars that they can bring their professor back, and if they do, that he will help them move on with their lives or get the job that they want or the positions that they want. And they feel very strongly that they cannot do this if they don't bring him back. So let's just dive right into if I think you should read this book, what I liked about this book, and who is this book for. So this is an interesting topic because a lot of people have opinions on RF Kuang. And how their writing style is. So I've actually only read The Poppy War, which I have here, and I haven't read 2 and 3. Rob actually, that was the first book that he chose for me to read on this show, and I really struggled with it. I loved the story, but had issues with the pacing and issues, I'm trying to remember, issues with the magic, and how that story was going to all come together. I didn't love it. I didn't love some of the gratuitous violence. And this has been common in RF Kuang's books. It's actually been said that she writes above your average reading level and even above that. So when you're trying to get in like your average readers or a large quantity of readers that are going to enjoy your book, people say that RF Kuang is not necessarily the writer that's going to do that. So having that said, I just wanted to get that out of the way. How did I feel about this book? Who is the reader for this book, knowing what we know about the author? Well, this is where I struggle a little bit. But if you go back to an episode I did about fantasy authors and romantasy in general, I talk about rot not and a strategy that I have to still enjoy romantic fantasy, because too much romantic fantasy and I start to get overwhelmed or almost bored. And so I like to put not. So rot, like lots of romantic fantasy, maybe a bit spicy. And then I like to put the not in there, which is like a good solid book. If you're someone who wants a solid book, like well written, great characters, great setting, great thinking, then this is a book for you. If you're here because it said dark academia, I'm not so sure it was dark academia, but I want to talk about that at the end. Let's talk about what I loved about this book. So I really, really loved the setting. And if you're someone who likes to get into deep adventures and journeys and epic kind of fantasies, then I think this is the book for you, because the way that hell is described in this book is actually quite interesting and very, very fantasy. So we get all these different layers of hell and different buildings in hell and a very interesting journey. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, because one of my favorite areas in hell that they had to get through was sin. So imagine almost like catching fire in the Hunger Games trilogy, where the game that they were in was split like a clock and was divided. This area of hell is sort of divided like that. And the different pie quadrants are different types of sin. So there's greed, there's lust, which is also, I think, called desire. There's so many different sections, and it's very, very interesting. And they don't visit them all, but I found it really, really cool. There's a lake in hell that can erase your memory. There's these demons in hell that are more like a walking undead army. So overall, written very, very cool. So if you're someone that likes to get absorbed into a setting and really get lost in that and think what could be, then I think that this book is for you. Another thing I loved about this book was just the characters in general. Like, I really loved Peter and Alice, which are the main characters. What works in this story is that you have a budding romance. And it's unclear the way the author writes it, whether they had an existing romance or not. And this will become apparent as you read the book. But I was actually questioning, did they have an affair? Did they have something already before the story begins with us? Because there's references to he's not how he used to be, and she remembers more things than not. And this will make sense if you read it. But it makes you constantly question, what am I, the reader, missing? So it keeps it interesting. So I really enjoyed their relationship. And Peter is just kind of clumsy at love and actually comes across as someone who I would probably go as far to say is like neurodivergent in some way, to where he's not picking up on certain types of empathy or missing certain things. And I don't know that that's true, but that's how I interpreted the character. And then Alice is also just very, very driven and really focused on her work and her studies, that I think she misses things too. But they both have wants and desires, because that's just human nature. So despite their capacity as magicians and scholars, and how that's where their focus is, and how the book's written, really with all the philosophy and the logic, despite all of that, they're still really driven by want and desire. And so lust is an interesting part of this book, although it's not a heavy part of this book, in terms of it's not spicy. All right, another thing that I loved about this book is that additional characters were brought into the plot that are pivotal characters, and they came in pretty late into the game, but they added a lot more to the story. And I didn't see it coming, and that's interesting. And yes, you find them in hell, but they were beings of our world or our earth, before being in hell. So just really dynamic in terms of like, I didn't see it coming. It was fun. I loved how much it added to the story. And once I got those characters added, I couldn't imagine it without them. I also didn't realize at that time that I was maybe getting a little bit tired of just Alice and Peter and Professor Grimes, whom they're looking for. I should also mention that Professor Grimes is someone who's probably not worthy to be brought back. And this is a lot of talks about karma, reincarnation, different religious themes, and a lot of them are explored. It's not one religion in hell. It's not one ideation or a way of thinking. The author explores all sorts of different types of religion. So I think that if you're thinking, oh, this is only going to be like Christian or Catholic or heaven and hell, it's not at all like that. It's very cerebral. It's very educational. It's almost written, I mean, because RF Kuang's a professor, it's almost written like a school book in a way. I don't know how to describe that. Like, it's pretty deep. So let's get into what I don't like, and this will probably take you out of the running if you're thinking this might be a book you want to read. So I mentioned a little bit before on whether or not RF Kuang writes to your average reader, and I said she does not. Well, this book definitely does not. Now, I haven't read Babel. I have read Poppy Wars, but I've talked to people who read Babel and Yellowface and her other books, and this one is over the top. There's so much math, there's so much philosophy, there's so much logic, and it really drowns you. And I found myself so very, very bored and wanting to skip over those parts. And I should say that I listened to this via audiobook. So those sections were even said often in a different voice. I don't know what it looked like in the book, but it looked like it would have been an excerpt or maybe something that leads before a chapter, or maybe a text within a chapter. I am not exactly sure how it showed up in the book, but you know it when you get those when you're listening to audiobook, and it just droned on and on and on. And honestly, if it were a real book in my hands, I would have skipped past those pages because I couldn't take it. And that was actually pretty early on in the book. It's when they go to hell that you get that, but way too much. And a lot of the thinking is inside our characters' heads, and hearing them think logically, hearing them think philosophically because they've been trained this way is also a bit frustrating, and it makes the book feel very, very slow. And hey, maybe you're very confident in yourself. You're like, I'm a scholar. I've got this. I had, all A's in high school. This doesn't intimidate me. I'm telling you, I'm a smart person too. And reading this, I was just a bit bored. So I think that was a miss on the author's part. And maybe R.F. Kuang just wants to write this way. I'm not sure. She seems to be very confident in herself and her teaching abilities, but I actually felt like I was being taught to. And I just wanted to immerse myself in a book and enjoy it. So this was a huge part of the book that brought down what would be my score for me. I think I would rate this book higher if I didn't get lost in so much teaching. Like there's parts where they're explaining, where the author is explaining like calculus and equations. And I'm like, really? No. So if you just want to read a good book, skip those parts and get the physical book so that you can actually like see. They're I think kind of lengthy. You can skip several pages. Outside of that, I think the author missed opportunity for more drama that was like literally right there on the pages. And that is greed and desire in hell. I think those sections were very sorely missed out on. And I think that would have been a way, especially desire, to bring the characters together more. And what we have in desire, and we know why later, we know definitely why Alice wouldn't have wanted to be there. But desire was an opportunity, I think, that we could have even brought them together for a passionate kiss. It didn't have to be sex. It didn't have to be anything like that. But I would think in desire, especially because we're inside the main characters' heads and we know that they have attraction to each other, that the minute they walked into desire's doors, because these are like buildings in hell, that they would have felt more of something towards each other. And they're on a mission to find their professor because they're thinking he might be in one of these sections in hell, and they don't find him there. But maybe it's just because they were looking so hard for him. I don't know, but just missed opportunity. And then greed in hell, at least for these characters, is knowledge. So they're basically in a library. And I think there was a lot of opportunity here, especially for Alice to get lost in the books and Peter have to pull her out. And I felt that while setting wise, this was one of the most interesting parts of the book, plot wise, it was one of the most boring parts of the book. So really, really frustrating for me because I wanted to love it. And I just see wasted potential on the pages. Another thing I didn't like was that hell seemed very magician based, and I could have got something wrong here. So I want to say that, like, this could just be me. I missed something. It can happen in audiobooks, I think, which is why I generally prefer physical books. But in the real world above hell, not everyone's a magician. The magicians are actually somewhat rare because you have to go through so much school to become a magician. There's basic magic, but like real magic that you get hired for comes from these really nice universities. Yet everyone in hell was a magician, or at least everyone they talked about was a magician or was striving to pass their examinations. And I just didn't quite understand why more of the regular populace was left out of hell, because I think that was wasted opportunity too. I would have wanted to see, like in Desire or Gluttony, like the drunk like, well, like running around and like bothering them. That would have been funny. Just things like that. Like the regular populace wasn't mentioned. Why did we only focus on magicians in hell? I get that that was these people's story, but there was more to the story. And also, did I miss something? Are there different types of hell and they're just in the one for magicians? I don't know, but missed out. Let's also talk about dark academia because this book is marketed as dark academia. So, when I think of dark academia, I think more setting based, which is where I might get hung up here because I'm thinking this happens at a war college, like in Fourth Wing, or at a school for vampires, things like that. Usually, you're at a school or a university for dark academia. And it's not like they're not because they do start off in Cambridge. But they spend the majority of the book in hell, which in some way mimics the real world, like flipped upside down. So there's some sections where it is Cambridge, but like feels like the reverse of it. And definitely like the libraries or these different sections in hell definitely feel academia, but are not enough because there's not other students. Because keep in mind, you're in hell. So there's like 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds that have died. And there's people who've actually been there a really, really long time because they're basically their goal, I didn't mention this earlier, is to try to be reincarnated. So you go through all these sections of hell and you redeem yourself and you pass exams and you pass logic and theory. Just kind of odd, but and you do all of that to prove that yes, I am worthy of the very, very few that get sent back into the real world and are reincarnated. So I don't know. It didn't feel academia in that way because every character that wasn't Peter and Alice, who are living in hell because they used magic to get there, every character that's not them, just by nature of being in hell so long, feels old. And because it feels old, it doesn't feel academia to me. And I really struggled with that. Especially if you're a young reader who's really just getting into, young adult or new adult, and you've read other books like Fourth Wing or true dark academia where they're out of college and like people die and it's war. This is not that. I'm not saying it's not good, but I don't know that it's dark academia. So, time to read the book. I would say that this book it's growing on me. It was a 3. When I first finished the book, I said, this is just a 3. Like, there's a lot here. There's a lot of great stuff, good plot, good characters, good writing, just overall, like, could have been a 5. But then I was so bored in so many sections. So that brought it down to a 3. But this book is also cerebral. So the more you think about it, and the more you try to get in the author's head and how they wrote, why they wrote, and the different layers of writing to this, and especially between Peter and Alice, because there's a condition that Peter has that he never talks about until towards the end of the book. So Alice misjudges him. And then he misjudges her because she has something that's not conditional, that's not like a disease or something wrong with her internally, but she has something that's modified on her that if he knew would probably change his opinion of her. So all these different layers, the more you think about them, I think as it marinates, your opinion of the book will increase. So I actually encourage readers to not judge the book too soon, but I'm about a week or so out after having finished it, and I would raise my score to a 3.5. I almost think I want to revisit this book in a year and really sit down and think about it. It could be a 4, but it's just slow. The pacing was just off for me. I wanted more. It'll never be a 5 in terms of what the characters could have accomplished or what I feel from the book. The feel will never be there. But how cool the book is, how interesting the writing is, and conceptually, the book's probably closer to a 4. So yeah, 3.5 today. Do I encourage you to pick up Katabasis? I think yes. I think that readers should read a book like this because if you don't, you're not opening yourself up to potential because there's so much potential in this book and you can see inspiration from other books. I mentioned The Incandescent earlier by Emily Tesh and how I felt that book about dark academia and hell and demons, could have been better. This is better than that, and I see a lot of similarities between the two. So, if you read The Incandescent, I would absolutely say read this one. But maybe put a spicy romantic fantasy in between because neither were very spicy. So, yeah, a lot of character, a lot of interesting concepts, missed the mark slightly. 3.5. Also, if you enjoy this podcast, enjoy Rob and I talking about books, please hit like and subscribe. We're almost to 500 subscribers. Would be so excited for you to help us get there. Thank you so much and join you next week.